Right, a warm welcome to you from Geneva, Switzerland. I'm Reda, Sadki. As you can see, we'll be starting episode 8 of the Geneva Learning Foundation's Dialogue for Learning and Leadership in 2 minutes and 35 seconds. If you're listening to the podcast recording of this dialogue, you may want to skip with your podcast player 2 minutes 30. If you're listening live, then you won't be able to do that. Do let us know whether you're connected on Facebook, YouTube, Twitter, LinkedIn, wherever you may be. If you are listening live, leave a comment. Let us know where you're from, city and country, why you're joining this dialogue on what is evening for us in Geneva, Switzerland, but maybe afternoon or early morning or late, very late at night, depending on where you are. See you in 2 minutes and 0 seconds. All right, we're now 1 minute 30 seconds away from the episode 8, the 8th convening of the Geneva Learning Foundation to discuss and explore critical issues around learning and leadership, as well as the individual journeys that take us towards a greater consciousness of the significance of learning and leadership, especially for those of us working for change. If you are connecting via Facebook, LinkedIn, whatever it may be, let us know where you're connecting from, and hello to Godwin, to Lonu, and many others who are joining right now. See you in just under a minute. All right, a warm welcome to you from Geneva, Switzerland. I'm Reda Sadki, and I'm delighted to introduce this 8th episode of the Geneva Learning Foundation's Dialogue for Learning and Leadership. My co-convener, Professor Karen Watkins, is getting ready for the American tradition of Halloween trick-or-treating. Karen, since the 7th dialogue that was held on 26th of September, what has been for you the most important or surprising event that happened that has to do with what we're specifically interested in this dialogue, the question of learning and leadership?
Well, quite a lot has happened since then. I would have to say I was privileged to be part of a conference on coaching and leadership, in which we talked about action learning conversations and their role. But I think the thing that really stands out that I'd like to share today is that I was able, as part of another project that I'm part of, to conduct an interview with we've been interviewing physicians about dealing with uncertainty during COVID and what they've learned from that. And so we had an interview this past week, actually. And the physician was talking about being in the emergency department in March of last year when COVID had really hit and things were still very uncertain. Nobody knew what to do. And being assigned to the trauma bay and suddenly realizing that somebody could be coming in with trauma. Maybe they'd been hit by a car or something, but they could also have COVID. And that simultaneous realization, he goes on to talk about the concerns that would be typical around how much protective equipment to wear and who should wear it and all of that. But so it was that sort of incidental, the coincident, I guess, trauma of people realizing that they could be in jeopardy as well as physicians, and wondering what to do. And so he said the most interesting things. He said it was familiar but new, and I thought that's such a characterization of work today, post-pandemic. And then he said that he says, in the end, it's always about reinforcing the anchoring bias that you have to, that you pivot. You have to pivot on the fly. And I think that as a sort of mantra for thinking about leadership and learning, that notion of pivoting on the fly really struck with me. We heard Ann Pendleton Julian talk about her ideas of design unbound, and her phrase for this was that you have to poke at the periphery. That if you really want to learn at the edge, you need to be poking at the periphery. And I think that's really what I like about these dialogues, Reda, is that I think that you try to poke at the periphery of learning and leadership. And we do that through our guests who speak with us, and also with some of the things that we read together and think about. So I look forward to another opportunity to poke a little bit at the periphery.
Indeed. So I want to talk tonight, for me, maybe afternoon or morning, or very early morning, as you'll hear from one of our key contributors. I want to talk about the metaverse. So if it's the first time you're hearing this term, or whether it's something you've been exploring, reading, practicing for years, well, I think it's important to talk about it. There's an announcement that happened this week, and the metaverse is defined as the entire spectrum of virtual reality. And thinking about what it means for learning and leadership, I think is going to become increasingly important. I watched an announcement from Facebook, which just changed its name to be called Meta now. The announcement happened this week, and I found it really interesting because in 2021, a social media business, the largest one in the world, gears up to embrace and absorb not just a tool or a technology, but culture, economy, the very act of creation. And so here is what Facebook says the metaverse means for learning.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marnie Levine. In the metaverse, learning won't feel anything like the way we've learned before.
There you go. So learning won't feel like anything we have experienced before. We'll be going back and discussing the metaverse. Every episode is different, drawing on the life experiences of key contributors and of listeners who become contributors by sharing their own learning and leadership challenges and what you are doing about them. Now, you can learn more about the dialogue on the Geneva Learning Foundation's website, learning.foundation. Even better, you can now subscribe to the dialogue as a podcast. You go to learning.foundation/podcast for that. And we also invite key contributors to shamelessly promote their work during the dialogue. This is so listeners who want to know more will know where to go after each episode. So today we're going to be meeting Iris Isiptan and Peter Tippett to explore their individual leadership journeys. And in the second half of the dialogue, we'll explore the metaverse. Peter Tippett, we'll hear about him a little bit later, is an Australian first responder and entrepreneur on a mission to empower educators. He says the world changed because of COVID, and for Peter it happened in a yoga studio. You'll get to hear what he did in response to the pandemic and discover the surprising roots of his vision for learning and leadership. Now I want to turn to Iris Isiptan. Iris, you are by day the director of the Interactive Learning Center at the University of the Philippines in Manila. By night, you are the endocrine witch, leading the digital transformation of medical education by showing your esteemed colleagues how to use Twitter, how to teach and support effective learning online. So first of all, a warm welcome, Iris. And my first question to you, has anything really changed since early 2020 when your colleagues suddenly had to become very interested in what some people have called emergency remote online learning.
Good morning, everyone from Manila. So it's now 4:07 in the morning in Manila. Hi, Reda. Yes, definitely. It was very different around March 2020. Suddenly, everyone wanted to become my best friend. I have been pushing for blended learning in medical education for many years, and I have been sharing what I do online with my colleagues as well. But at that time, they were thinking, well, it's nice to do. You go and continue doing that. Maybe our younger colleagues will be interested, but most of the senior people were saying, well, we're too old for that, but we're glad that change is coming. But when the pandemic hit and everything had to go online, because Manila, in fact, the entire Luzon, or the main island where we were, had to be put on lockdown. So everything had to go online. And so people who weren't interested before in putting their courses on the learning management system suddenly had to, as Karen said, pivot and try to put everything online. And we were hard pressed to actually provide some guidance because everyone really had a hard time, both the students and the faculty as well, going into, as you said, emergency remote learning.
Thanks, Iris. And so has anything really changed since that time? Do you see a more profound effect? Obviously, your colleagues had to come to you, and we're probably grateful. Hopefully, we're grateful to have you as a resource. But have you seen changes in attitudes, in behaviors, in ways that people who are in the business of teaching think about what, the significance of teaching and how they teach?
Okay, so at the time, early in the pandemic, people really had just to get their learning online. And so they were thinking this was something temporary. And they weren't thinking of, continuing with it after the pandemic. Obviously, the pandemic has dragged on. And I still see those two groups. One group that says, well, after all this is over, I do not want to have any more Zoom meetings with my students. I would really like to put everything back to where it was, face to face. But there's also the other group that says, well, it wasn't that bad. So maybe we should really explore blended learning or a hybrid of online and offline, even when things settle back to normal. However, there's also been this realization that we need what I termed adaptive expertise, where teachers have to really say, there are problems with the way we're doing emergency remote learning. How can we make this better? Because, we have to do this for longer than we expected.
I want to turn now to and introduce Keith Hampson. Keith is a consultant who works with and within and without, I would say, higher education. Keith, I'm going to ask you to introduce yourself. And when you hear, so Iris's story is in the university in the Philippines, halfway around the world where you work in Canada. Does it sound familiar? What are the insights and the takeaways when you hear a story like this one, as how she, as the director of the Interactive Learning Center at the University of the Philippines, suddenly became very popular?
Yes, and overworked, I'm sure. Yeah, it sounds very familiar, Reda, no question about it. Very interesting comments from Iris. Well, it's not a byproduct of some sort of formal study, but all of us in this field are hearing roughly the same thing, that people expect to go back to the classroom, and there might even actually be some greater urgency about formats for a lot of educators, those that want to get back to the classroom, back to face to face. However, a couple of thoughts. I don't think that's going to last. I think we're going to see this desire to get back to face to people with not as a long-term trend, and nothing that's going to slow down the move toward digital. I think we're all, whether we're talking about our jobs as educators or just in social terms, we want to get back face to face. I think that's all we're really hearing from educators, is that desire to go back to what's familiar, but also what's socially engaging for most of us. And the second point is I'm also hearing that more from administrators, people who actually are decision makers, that we're not going back. That whatever gains or momentum that we've experienced over the last 18 months, that we want to continue that. We want to not waste the investment, waste the learning that's happened over the last 18 months, and really we could probably say 20 years, but particularly the last 18 months. We don't want to waste that. We want to keep moving forward. We want to see what we can get from digital in the future. And maybe just as a final point, I don't think much has changed, if I had to generalize, about instructional strategies in higher ed. There hasn't really been
we'll definitely
the
come
opportunity.
back. Yeah. We'll definitely come back to that. Iris, we want to talk about your leadership journey and your role as learning leader. You and I met in 2016, right at the moment of the creation of the Geneva Learning Foundation. Could I ask you, what is your recollection of how you came to know of the foundation's work, and what have you retained, if anything, from that initial experience?
Oh, I do not remember how I heard about it. Probably I saw it online or on Twitter or something. But in 2016, I was just new as the Interactive Learning Center Director. But I had been, before that, the chief of the medical informatics unit. So I was very comfortable being online and digital. What did I retain from the course? Well, really, it was an experience of a different kind of learning management system. I know that you and I had been talking about Moodle, and I experienced the Scholar platform. And then I learned more about peer learning and how to structure an online course, because up to that point, before I took your course, I was just like trying to do it the way I thought it should work. But then I got a framework from you on how we should actually be doing things. You made me more comfortable actually with doing video. I think those are the things that I remember retaining.
Fascinating. This was 5 years ago. So, and did you see yourself as a learning leader then? Do you see yourself as a leader for learning now?
Okay, what really happened was while I was doing work at the College of Medicine, going for blended learning, I applied to a grant for innovations in teaching. And I actually won at the university system level. So everyone suddenly knew about the work I was doing. And that was why I was invited to become the Interactive Learning Center Director. I really see myself more as a change agent. Because even without the position, I had been volunteering my time teaching other colleagues about digital tools that they could use. And the position only sort of made it more formal, and I could do more things because I was now in the administration.
Interesting. And so when and how did you realize that this leadership question, or as you put it, this question of how you lead change, how you become and actually hold this role of a change agent, when did you realize that how significant it was to be conscious about that, to be sort of intentional about how you work with your colleagues, convince, persuade, cajole, argue, convince them to so help them, support them as they navigate through the digital transformation?
So in the beginning, for example, I took one of the courses on Coursera when it was just starting, and that's where I said, wow, this is good. Maybe I could try something like this. And so I started convincing some friends to try here and there. But when I won the teaching award, and then when I got the position, it wasn't something that I could do when I wanted to. I now had the position, so I now had to schedule all the faculty development workshops and think about, okay, what do the faculty need right now? How do I get them into the learning management system, or at least try some of these digital tools that are already available? And then that's when I realized going outside of the College of Medicine and into the university level, where there are 8 other colleges, that it's harder because these people do not know me because I'm from the College of Medicine. And so it was harder to convince them. And most of them would say, yeah, that's good, looks good. We can try. But, there wasn't really any motivation to try until the pandemic happened.
And can you think of a time, something that happened when you exercise this leadership, a very concrete example of something that happened where you were able to shift people's attitudes and behaviors about digital learning? What happened? Is there anything that surprised you in how it happened, and what did you learn from it?
Okay, so when I became the director, what I did first was to do like a road show. I would go to each of the colleges and schedule a meeting and try to show them what is possible. And most of them said, well, you see, whether we try your new tools or we don't, we still receive the same salary. Nobody rewards us for doing innovative things with our teaching. Yeah. And so I went then to the chancellor and I told her that maybe we should think of some incentive. Maybe the easiest would be financial incentive if the university was willing to shoulder that. And so 2 years before the pandemic happened, I actually got funding to entice 100 teams to put up their courses in the learning management system. So we said, for every course that you put in there, you will be entitled to this financial incentive. Now, to make sure that they would do what they were supposed to do, I organized 3 workshops for all the people who received the grant. So first, they had to take a video production workshop. Second, they had to take a course on how to convert their current curriculum into something that was blended. And lastly was to use the more interactive features in the learning management system, because at that point, I had realized that some people thought that a learning management system was like a glorified Google Drive where you just dump everything into it. And so suddenly I had this like 100 teams who were motivated to do things. And that was really useful because when the pandemic hit, these very people were the ones who were helping me because they were spread out all over the 8 colleges already.
Fascinating. So we're privileged in the dialogue to have a number of key contributors who've really dedicated their life's work to the study of leadership and learning. And Iris, as we learn about your leadership journey, I want to turn to, let's start with my co-convener, Karen Watkins. What are you hearing as you listen to Iris's story? What are you taking away about leadership? We've discussed many aspects of it in previous dialogues. What are you hearing in Iris's story?
I was particularly intrigued, Iris, when you talked about the notion that when you got the position, it enabled you to do different things because of the position power. And so I think that there is an element in leadership to wearing a title, having a role that is identified, that you become the spokesperson for going digital on your campus because of that title and that role. You become the advocate, which is why you were able to get the resources that you did, because you could make people see through the capacity that you had in that role, that was an essential piece. We've had a very similar situation for us as we've gone digital, that those of us that had been funded or had gone digital earlier also became, they become your cadre of change agents that you send out into the world. And so I think the replication effect of developing teams, developing people in all the 8 colleges that you did, is another part that I think is really, really important in leadership, is that we have to build those networks. So we have to build the cadres of people, because Herb Shepard, who my favorite expert on change agentry, he talks about making a living while helping people, and his notion was that that, he always said, never send one when two will do. And I love that. I love that expression that we don't do this alone. We build our village as we go. And I think that was clear in your story too, Iris. Very nice.
Karen, what I find so interesting about Iris's story is she hasn't talked about, Iris, you haven't talked about what you do on Twitter by night. Yes, and as the endocrine witch, what I saw, this is where I was really amazed and taken aback when I saw you had participated in the our very first learning initiative, really distinguished yourself as a learner. But then I discovered that on Twitter you had this sort of secret identity where you were continually without any of the authority that a formal role confers, engaging your colleagues, medical, fellow doctors, fellow medical and other health professionals, to really embrace and first discover Twitter and other social media, and basically discover the internet and learn to use it for their own purposes. Can you tell us a little bit more about that? And maybe if you had to give up one, you had to give up your formal role and what you've been able to, the change that you've been able to effect in your formal role as director of the Interactive Learning Center, or you had to give up your role and what you do by informal means on Twitter and other places as the endocrine witch, which would you choose and why?
Wow. Well, first let's start with how I started on Twitter. I had to go out of Manila to a conference in the US, and my medical informatics mentor was saying, why don't you be on Twitter so that you can tweet about the conference and let us know how you're doing? So that's really how I ended up in 2010 on Twitter. And when I was there, I couldn't really understand it at first because I was tweeting and nobody was responding to me. And then I said, but people are here. I wonder what they're really doing here, because at the time I was just using it to broadcast. And then I read books about Twitter, and then I learned about establishing personal learning networks online. And so I started following people and getting more interested because I could meet people outside of the Philippines and follow them. I started following, for example, endocrinologists because I am an endocrinologist. And so I started getting this network, and then I looked for other physicians in the Philippines who might be interested in forming a group to have a Twitter chat. And that's why HealthXPH was actually born. And in the beginning, there were only 4 of us. And then now we're 7. So that means every Saturday night, as Reda said, Manila time, we have a tweet chat for an hour talking about issues that are important to us. And we were amazed that people from the US, Canada, Australia, Ireland even were joining us. And so that really makes your perspective grow because you have all these other people outside of your network locally in the Philippines to talk with. If I were to give up one role, I would certainly give up my role as the Interactive Learning Center Director. Because I feel like sometimes that also can get in the way because you have to continually think of how others in the organization would feel about things that you do. So recently, for example, we had an issue whether we should change the learning management system or not. And the decision was made to actually get another learning management system. So I'm having problems now having to manage 2 learning management systems and trying to keep up with the training for both learning management systems, etc.
Fascinating. All right. Thank you, Iris and Karen and Keith. Now, we're going to talk next about and with Peter Tippett. He's an entrepreneur based in Australia who grew up in the New Zealand neighborhood that became the setting for a movie maybe somebody listening is familiar with, called Once Were Warriors, 1994, directed by Lee Tamahori. Even if you've never heard of this movie, before we go any further, I want to greet a couple of the people who are joining us online. Tai Girma from Ethiopia, attending, and then Ismail nurse, Ismail Nasiru from Kano, Nigeria. We're going to limit the number of people we greet. And again, I want to encourage you not just to say hello, but also to share your comments and feedback. And of course, there are the contributors who are in the Zoom studio with us, would like to, so I'm going to spend a little bit of time. Let's see, Dr. Abdul Samad Khan from Chagai, Pakistan, who's here. A warm welcome to you. Raimi Marufu, Olalekan from Nigeria. Dr. Ndeje Mami Valérie. Désolé, il n'y a pas de traduction française ce soir. There's no French translation. I hope that you'll still be able to follow along. J'espère que vous arriverez néanmoins à nous suivre. Ndayo Iwat, also from Nigeria, from Abuja. Dr. Sumant Kulsh Retha, and Boma Otobo, Ofori Isiam, Saidu, Jamila Husseini, Mary Goretti Otieno. Now, if you would like to comment, if you have questions for Iris or other key contributors, please let us know. You can either raise your hand or type your comments in the chat. All right, so let's meet Peter. Let's hear why Peter is on a mission. Why are you on a mission to empower educators, and how does somebody choose that as their mission?
Basically, COVID opened the door which I didn't anticipate. The world changed, and one of my clients I've been working with and teaching and mentoring rang me up and says, my business has just been turned over. Help me. And he runs a yoga business, and I just fell into it. And we basically had an opportunity to reset a whole industry. And that's been an interesting learning. And I've done this a few times of resetting different industries with live TV engagement, legal software and that. So, but a lot of the stuff have been about helping people and educating them and taking them to the next level. And that's my role in life, is to help people. And that comes back from my core background, where I grew up in South Auckland in New Zealand, where your word was your bond or you lost your kneecaps.
So Peter Tippett, we asked him and we discussed, what changed, if anything, due to the pandemic?
I had one teacher, she's excelling. She's just a normal teacher. She's from Ireland, lives out here. When she went online, she suddenly had a lot of island students that couldn't work with her before were suddenly doing her classes and actually contributing to her to develop. And now that we're moving into a whole new phase where people, like we've just asked the whole lot of students, would they go back to studio only? And they're all going, no, I'm going to do online because convenience. I'll mix both of them and it'll become hybrid. And then we've been developing ideas of how to help them to learn and connect online. And it's not using the Zoom model like video conferencing. It's actually taking a new idea, which is actually old idea. And we all experience at primary school when the teacher walk around, look over our shoulder and correct us. And we've been developing a digital equivalent of that. So the teacher can play a video of what you need to do, and then they can watch you and talk to you directly and say, hey, tighten that up, tighten that stomach up, lift that leg a little bit, you're wobbling, and give direct feedback wherever you are in the world, which is actually starting to bring some of the analog model into the digital world. And you've got to think about what it's going to be like in 3 to 4 years' time, where digital is a lot closer to analog.
So that's Peter Tippett. He built a platform in the early days of the pandemic when, in response to that initial shock that we all experienced across the world. But in his case, to help yoga teachers, he was talking about one of them specifically in one of the clips, and to help yoga teachers replicate and augment the kind of direct observation and feedback that these teachers feel are key to their experience of teaching and learning, to be able to teach and learn effectively. And this happened very quickly. He asked the question, what do online learning systems look like in 3-4 years if we were able to do so much so quickly in response to the shock of the pandemic? Is 3 or 4 years the right time frame? And Again, that question, whether you teach in a university or a remote village, what do you think has changed and why does it matter? So I'd like to open up here to all of the key contributors. Would love to hear, now Iris, you work in medical education. Here we're talking about yoga. You may or may not be a practitioner. Does this challenge of, the challenge that Peter worked on, building a system to help teachers be effective, does that sound familiar? What do you hear when you hear Peter's these first segments from Peter's story? And then I'm going to ask Keith to comment on what that education industry outside of higher education, outside of the university looks like. But let's start with Iris.
Okay, so one of the earliest distress calls I got were from a group of microbiology teachers. And so because everything had to go online, if you had to teach certain procedures in the laboratory, they weren't ready with their videos. And I had to look for some simulators online, for example, on how to use a microscope. And I had them look at that. And they said, well, it's fine and good. The students can see the parts of the microscope and how it actually works, but actually handling the microscope and getting the feedback of like how you turn the knobs and position the slides, etc., you can't capture that on the simulation. So certainly that's an interesting thing, and connecting with what you were saying about the metaverse earlier, about how we can leverage more of this virtual reality tools to make it more simulated, I guess, to the real thing.
Keith, I know you work with a certain number of educational technology startups. Here's an entrepreneur who, in response to a shock, he knows some yoga teachers and builds a platform and does something that he says is better than Zoom, that can actually provide those feedback loops, that direct observation that's so important. Does this sound like a familiar story from the early days of the pandemic? What are your thoughts? What does this mean to have someone who's not based in higher education, who's not in what we can conventionally think of as the education industry, do this? And what does it look like 3 or 4 years from now, in your view?
Those questions are much too hard for somebody as simple as myself, Reda. But I think it's important, and I don't know the specifics of your colleague's application and service for yoga. But the first thing that comes to mind when I listen to him is that it sounds like he built some sort of application and maybe services around it that suit that particular type of teaching, and also possibly it's built according to the needs of that industry, yoga teaching. And if that's the case, and I'm going to assume that it is, does it work in other contexts? That's a really big issue. In higher ed and in corporate online learning, the goal has always been to build a platform that as many people and as many types of organizations can use. So it's a blank canvas model. You want to keep it as generic as possible. You want it to work for science and the humanities and yoga. So there's always limits to that strategy, right? If you don't really tailor the technology to a specific set of needs, a specific situation. But it also has a cost implication. If we have to build a unique application for each of the 5,000 industries, I'm just guessing, what we can spend on each one of those is going to be far more limited. And that's a really big long-term issue in educational technology. You brought up that metaverse thing, and with Facebook, that higher ed, and I think much of online learning right now outside of higher ed, is still sort of cottage industry, right? Iris talks about having to get individual instructors to do X, Y, and Z. Most of the responsibility falls to that one instructor. When you're looking at something like metaverse, you're talking about a $50 million investment on top of probably $1 billion in prior investment that gets us to the point where we can do virtual reality. So compare that to the cottage industry. I'll do it myself by and large. They'll pay me $2,000 to do it versus metaverse. Those are entirely different approaches. And that approach can't be done in higher ed. It can't be done in many parts of nonprofit. So we've got a real disconnect between the possibilities that Facebook hopes to provide and everybody else. I mean, they've been knocking on this door for years. And the actual practices of most educators. Two entirely different worlds.
Yeah. Fascinating. We're going to deep dive into the metaverse. Peter Tippett talked about COVID, and he has a particular view about what has changed with COVID. Let's listen.
It's just made us all actually become experimenters, try things. Don't be afraid, because we wanted to do things, to connect and do this. And that's what COVID in some ways has been great, because it's actually made us all go, we've lost the fear of trying new things because we've had no choice. And that's going to continue, because we're now learned we can try new things and not have that fear. It's a strange world in that way.
So we associate the pandemic with fear and anxiety. In past episodes of the dialogue, we've at least alluded to the mental health consequences of that fear and that anxiety, which can be severe and are certainly affecting individuals, communities, and societies. Now, Peter says that the way he puts it is about innovation, is about our willingness to take risks. And when we have to take risks, by definition, we're more willing to do so than when it is not the only way that we can continue to do what we're supposed to be doing, such as teaching and learning. So Peter says we cannot assume where we will be in 10 years. We have to experience. And this is when we shifted to the discussion on leadership, where he conjured up a vision we've discussed before in the dialogue of a particular kind of servant leadership. Do you see yourself as a leader?
I see me more as a coach and empowering people. Leadership to me is you're a servant. And it's like when people give me their organizational charts and they have the CEO at the top, I turn it upside down and say, well, your job is to help all them exceed their expectations. And that's something that has to be inherent. It's not about me, it's about them, it's about we. And to me, that's what leadership's about. You have a vision, you empower people, you exude that passion to them, and you've heard me talk about this before. And they come along with the journey, but you let them drive it. And that's the hardest thing about being a leader. You're not in control.
Now, this we've talked about before, but what may be more surprising, what was surprising to me is to learn when and where and how Peter forged this vision of leadership.
The real time I learned was actually managing volunteers as a lifesaver on Bondi Beach. Everybody's passionate about protecting people's lives. And Bondi Beach is a real interesting place to be. You're saving lives every day. And you're volunteers, but you're passionate. And to manage volunteers, there's one fundamental thing. You say thank you. It's not about do. You trust them to do the job. And 95% of the time, you're all on the same path. 4% of the time, you're a bit more of a director. And 1% of the time, you're a dictator when things really go bad and you've got lives at risk. And you just got to tell people to go and do things.
Yeah.
And that taught me leadership, because managing volunteers, they can just say, I'm not interested, and walk off the door. All you're wearing is a pair of Speedos or a cozy or bikini, that's all you've got on. So you don't know people's backgrounds. So it's about you, which is really interesting. So you're thinking in a very different way of how people work. So you have to be respectful of people, polite, accepting, understand culture. But at the end of the day, we're there all for one purpose, and we're all doers. If somebody's in trouble, we'll go and check them. If they're not in trouble, we go, okay, we just walk back. But at the end of the day, if we've got to save them, we save them.
So it so happens that at the Geneva Learning Foundation, we've worked closely with first responders, with people who work in humanitarian response, with pre-hospital emergency community-based care as well. And I personally have grown to appreciate that culture of leadership and solidarity that's so critical to both getting the job done as well as dealing with the stress of work when it involves saving lives. What I'd like to do now is turn to Karen. Karen, you heard Peter Tippett's sort of vision of leadership, and first what he practically did in response to the pandemic, and then sort of what that vision of leadership looks like that underpins what he does. What are your thoughts? Some of this we've heard and discussed before. What seems important to you about his narrative?
I like your notion of leadership and solidarity. I think it's really interesting that he gives the example of the lifeguard, because there is that sort of life and death, emergency, urgency element to it, and leadership in crisis is I think a unique phenomenon in it. But the other part of leadership, if you're a lifeguard, is boring. It's sitting there waiting for something terrible to happen. In a way, you're just there observing and thinking. And so I think that that it's a really marvelous metaphor for leadership, because much of leadership is quite boring and administrative, and it really is. And so, but in the moment, you have to rise to the challenge, and so you do that, I think, because you were paying attention, and you have something within you that is able to see what needs to be done immediately.
Thanks, Karen. Now, Peter concludes with his vision of leadership in the sense of community leadership, and what leadership means for societies and for the profound shift that he believes is happening. We've spent most of our time talking about leadership at the level of the individual in relation to others. Here's his vision for decentralized communities and what that means for leadership.
It was all about getting people in the doors. Suddenly now, it's not about getting people in the doors. It's about how do I connect with people around the world who care about what I do. And that doesn't apply just to yoga. It applies to anybody in the arts or passionate or creative. There are people out there who like what you do and want to contribute. Now, Pantheon has helped to start that. But what we believe is the community should own it. And that's part of what blockchain with the distributed autonomous organization gives you the ability to do. And the cryptocurrency and distributed finance model allows people to support each other around the world and not be restricted by the banking system and the Wall Streets of this world. So suddenly we're able to create what's called digital countries that support each other. It's not based on location. It's actually based on who we are and what we care about. And we could join 5 different countries that are digital. Where at the moment, where I live in Australia, I'm restricted by my location. In a digital world, I'm not.
So that's Peter Tippett. You can find the full interview with him on the Geneva Learning Foundation's social media platforms, YouTube, for example. So I see some great dialogue building in the chat in our studio. Before we go to some of the contributors in the room, I want to go to Brian Hopkins. Brian, you just listened to, I hope you were able to hear Peter Tippett's both practical experience responding to the shock of the pandemic, building a completely new digital learning system, and then second, the sort of vision that underpins that. I know you're writing a book about complexity in learning. How does this resonate with you? What are your thoughts as you listen to this leadership narrative?
Yeah, interesting. My my wife is actually a yoga teacher, and she's not a she's never been terribly sort of interested in technology, but when the pandemic hit, she suddenly found herself having developed a whole new set of skills related to teaching online. And for quite a long period, her yoga teaching shifted from being in a physical room with people to actually doing it wholly online. And that lasted for quite a long period, 6 months or so. And then I suppose in the second half of hard to remember now, it's been going on for such a long time. But at some point she went back to teaching in the classroom. But there were quite a few people who, for various reasons, actually preferred joining in online. So she now has a hybrid teaching practice where she's running a class, a physical class, but also talking to people online. And I think it's a really, going back to what was discussed earlier, I think it's a really good example of how actually the shock to the system provided by COVID has actually opened up our awareness of particular possibilities for learning. And I hope that this, shaking of the orthodoxy continues, and we start to question that we can actually, develop, design, deliver more learning in hybrid ways. That it doesn't necessarily have to be wholly online, wholly face-to-face, that we can actually kind of bring things together. I was also taken by some other points that Karen mentioned, advocacy, which is a word that kind of resonates with me. I'm sitting here in the United Kingdom, just on the verge of hosting COP26. This is a subject very close to my own heart. As thank you, Reda, for giving me the opportunity for a book plug. I've been writing a book looking at how to develop learning strategies for sustainability in organizations.
Yep.
Sustainability from the perspective of both environmental sustainability and social sustainability, because I think the two are closely connected. So I think looking at my screen now, and I can see the two words learning and leadership. So, I've spent my whole working life in the learning sector, and I see that we as learning professionals have a leadership responsibility for making sure, for facilitating, supporting learning about sustainability. I mean, the climate emergency that we're facing at the moment, which we hope our esteemed and noble leaders will be addressing and giving full support to in Glasgow over the next 2 weeks. We hope that they will come out of it with major agreements to reduce carbon dioxide emissions. But we have to remember that environmental sustainability is not just about carbon dioxide, it's about the other issues. It's about ocean acidification. It's about the protection of the nitrogen and phosphorus cycles. It's about many other things. And these are all intimately connected with the social issues that those of us who work in health systems, humanitarian systems, development, that we're all dealing with. So I guess, the key thing for me is to remember that us as learning professionals have a leadership responsibility for making sure that we make people that we work with professionally and socially on an ongoing basis, and not just during the events that we do in our learning activities, that we're actually always reminding people that actually the earth, that we are at a crisis, at a tipping point in the history of humanity on the planet. The planet will go on, but whether or not we as humans will continue with it is very much a moot point. So
we hear your concern, Brian. Thank you.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Brian Hopkins. We have many great comments and reflections shared in the chat here. So let's go. Let's start with Dr. Sumant Kulshrestha. I hope I have not mispronounced your name, Doctor. You responded you had some specific questions for Iris. She's answered in the chat. Could you tell us, introduce yourself? Tell us what have you heard in tonight's dialogue so far? What are your takeaways? What are you going to leave with at the end of this, from the dialogue so far, let's say?
So first of all, thank you so much, Mr. Reda and the Geneva Learning Foundation for really a wonderful initiative. I believe there is a great way forward where we're talking about the new model of learning with respect to current pandemic, and I believe that the entire digitization, the altogether new way, though online learning have been always existing since many decades. But if you see in the current pandemic, I believe it has revolutionized, and I feel there are both ways. In terms of elementary learning, I feel there will be gaps. But for professionals, yes, it has been a boom, and the format like ours today itself is a great example that distance or there are no barriers in terms of when it comes to learning.
So sorry, but to understand where you're coming from, can you tell us who you are and what you do? Introduce yourself properly so we can better understand where your perspective is coming from.
Sorry, Mr. Reda. Thank you so much. So I'm Dr. Sumant, based out of India. There's a place called Bhopal, which is situated in the central India. I work as a healthcare professional, and I also work as sports management consultant. I work both with grassroots athletes and elite athletes. Recently, I worked with my Indian team for Tokyo 2020 and Paralympics 2020. And my major forte is in the pain management, and physiotherapy is my specialization is in sports physiotherapy and posture science. And for me, it's been good 16 years, and my major experience, apart from traveling to Europe and once to Tokyo, have been largely based on online learning. And I feel the power of internet, or when we talk about today, the mobile applications, web application, there are various softwares which help you learn. And today, learning have become so easy. Earlier it used to be very difficult to access. If I talk about my early days of learning during college, which was early 2000, when probably Google or the other software, search engines were not very popular. The research material, the faculties or the great authors, they were very limited. If I talk about with respect to the college learning, and after we entered into professional world and the advent of digital learning, I feel have taken a great leap. And I myself, being a avid learner, where I try to be part of the evidence-based practices and the latest technology and the latest update, and I owe great time to the web platform, which actually help in learning, connecting, collaborating.
Yep.
And it has been really a wonderful journey, if you talk about in terms of learning.
All right, wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Sumant Kulshrestha. And I hope I see Iris has been able to answer the practical questions you had. Now,
Yes.
I'd like to go to Boma Otobo. Boma, would love to hear from you. You had a comment. Let me see if I can find this. There have been many comments. You said, I believe online learning is here to stay in spite of a slow recovery to previous normal standards. However, I feel there is a need to simplify these learning methods to enable more people to get acquainted and see how they can latch on to the new technology. So first of all, please do introduce yourself and tell us how did you come to this belief about the need for simplification of online learning?
Okay, thank you, Dr. Reda, and thank you to all the panelists, everyone on the call. I'm Boma Otobo, and I work with the National Primary Healthcare Development Agency in Abuja, Nigeria. I made that comment because when everyone woke up to the pandemic, we all thought, wow, this is a huge blow and a dent on learning. But little did we know that this was just a pathway to greater things. You know, the digitalization of learning methods, and everyone seems to be catching up. But I still believe that the platforms, the way they're coming at us, I'm talking about those of us that are, not too conscious or don't have enough ability to use them. I feel that they're coming out too soon, too quick, and then while you're just trying to learn one, another one comes up. So there's actually the need for us to find better ways to simplify them, such that when you latch onto them, you would see the need for you to continue to use them. Even when we go back to normal, so to say, in quotes, you will find that it's even easier to use these digital technologies. You reach more people per time. You are able to develop new skills that help you do things faster. We didn't believe we could do things like that by just the press of a button. But now you can see that it's easy, but we still need to simplify it. And I believe as a leader, you want to show people how to do it. And I believe once you make the method simple, people will just latch onto it and they will learn faster. I think that's my contribution. Thank you, and over.
Thank you, Boma Otobo. I'd like to turn to Iris now. Iris, if in the learning center, the digital learning center of which you are the director, someone like Boma, a professional, a practitioner, comes to you and says, these platforms are changing all the time. Is there any way to make it simple? What do you respond? What does leadership for learning and digital learning in this context mean in response to such a question?
So the first thing I usually would ask is, what do you want to do? What is it that you want to convert to online or digital? And then we'll find a tool that might fit that best. And then we'll stick with that tool and try to get better at it. I think what really confuses people is so many of these tools come up and they say, wow, it can do this and it can do that. Wow, that's nice. They get all enamored and wanting to learn it all. But I suggest that first, pick one that you want to do, and then we'll work with that first.
Thanks, Iris. So my take on this is that I don't think it's going to get any slower. We all want single platform that works, that's super simple, that everyone can use, that's the same for that one size fits all. That's not going to happen either. And we're going to be living in this very messy world where the platforms are changing all the time very rapidly, and it's about developing the skills to adapt to that. And not everyone is going to be able to do that. And the risk is that some people will be left behind. But I'd like to make the comparison. If the sort of digital learning is so uncomfortable, is so clunky, struggling to listen to someone on a squawky call, their microphone's not working properly, your webcam is not working. It's a terrible experience compared to the sheer pleasure of being in a shared physical space with people you want to learn with and enjoying that sitting knee to knee with other human beings. There's simply no comparison. The thing to keep in mind is the rate of change, which is in a physical space. We kind of have been there and done that. We go there and do that every day. The digital space, things are changing so quickly. in fact, that's a good thing. That's the possibility of things getting much better, of the experience getting much better, and that includes simpler. That would be my response. Much less practical than Iris's. Keith, what's your take on this one? Oh, and you'll have to unmute. All right.
There I am. Can you pose that question another way for me, Reda?
Yeah. So Boma wanted to know, she sees platforms changing all the time, and she is, I happen to know she's a very diligent and outstanding online learner. But she says there may be colleagues who it's going to be too complicated. It changes too much. There are too many platforms to actually get a handle, and sort of latch into online learning. What would be your response?
Yeah, it's a really good point. There's a couple of things. One, design, and I use that term broadly, is the ability to create an interface, an application, an online experience that is simple, attractive, that it pulls you in. That's a very rare skill. And the people that are often behind the development of these applications, but I'd also say the people behind the development of instructional content, they're not very good. They are not the best in the industry. You'll find those people in the worlds of marketing and other in television and so forth. Not so much in education. We have a very long history of thinking that expertise and experts and knowledge is sufficient, that's what matters most, that we are being taught by somebody who's an expert or somebody that's affiliated with a prestigious institution, that's sufficient. It isn't. That has very little to do with learning. And that sort of logic, I think, has shaped the way that we've approached education forever. But it's also evident in the way that we've approached digital learning. If the expertise is all that matters and you don't care so much about the design of that experience, it's not going to be very good.
So the leadership question is, if you are involved in digital learning, what are likely to be, one question is, what are the strategies that are likely to be useful in conveying the significance, the potential of digital learning, and explaining to people, helping them navigate, adapt to it, and ultimately, hopefully, embrace it and use it for their own needs. Now, we have 3 hands up. We have Raimi, Emmanuel, and Joyce. I'm going to go to all 3 of you. Let's start with Raimi. I am going to ask, for the sake of time, if you can keep your comment or question short and to the point, please. Raimi Morufu, the floor is yours.
Yes, Reda, good evening, good morning, good night, depending on the country you are hearing me from. I want to say, for me, to be specific, I thank God for COVID-19. You see, COVID-19 is a game changer. I could remember I was having a discussion with the vice chancellor of my university some years back. And he told me, Dr. Maruf, we don't accept online degrees here. You have to go to the conventional university to acquire your PhD, not bring an online PhD. That was in 2016, 2017. But thank God for COVID-19 that changes everything. But the bitter part of it is that the developing country are finding it difficult because the infrastructure is not there. You know, there is a lot of even electricity is also another challenge, you know. So I thank God personally. For me, COVID-19 should not even end for me, so that we can actually take this online learning, hook, line, and sinker, so that it will not be part and parcel of our new culture. rather than these conventional. In fact, as a matter of fact, conventional universities in Nigeria and other African countries might likely die a natural death. In fact, I've started training my children to begin to learn online as little as they are 5 years, 6 years, to begin to learn, to accept it. But look at the leadership that you are not talking about. The leadership of the university is telling me they don't accept online degrees.
Right.
But what I've learned, particularly from your platform, Reda, through the immunization, this thing, 2030. In fact, all the universities I've been to in my country, I have not learned anything of such. And the World University I attended for my PhD give me a broader opportunity to look beyond the shores of my country. And that is the importance of learning globally. Now, COVID-19 has brought the world as a global village to every one of us. I have not met you, Reda, before, but we have been good friends. And I look for collaborating more with you. So, to me, online learning is the key to the next future. So, thank you so much.
Thank you very much indeed, Raimi. Let's go to Emmanuel Musa. Please keep your comment or question short and to the point.
Yeah, good evening, or whatever the time is. I'm still trying to add up my voice to what Otobo had said initially, and what the doctor just recently spoke. Emmanuel Musa from Kaduna, Nigeria. Now, we're looking at all the issue of the digital learning. Yes, I have another issue. I want us to look at another different cause entirely. Because in the digital world, we have a lot of things to absorb within the short and the possible time frame. An instance, you could have conflicting timing of activities. Probably, I have so many sessions, or sessions, or courses, or programs that I equally want to do, the learning activity I want to do at a particular time. So, which means you are left now to either you prioritize and then you leave others for one, or you forgo all, or you try to see if you can be able to absorb 2 or 3 within the shortest possible time with this digital learning. So one advantage of it is that, yes, you are trying to absorb many within the short possible time, but then the possibility of you trying to absorb one area that probably you need has another different disadvantage too, because you are trying to absorb so many things within a short possible time. So what is the digital learning now trying to do to make sure that one, you reduce, because we're trying to learn to absorb probably a particular field, and then you feel that that field that I'm trying to follow is not probably applicable. Let me try another field, the job search, education, and then you try this one, and then probably you have them all entirely in one particular piece. So what do we do in this kind of digital space? Thank you, Reda, for giving
Thank you, Emmanuel. Yeah, I think one particularly blatant example is just a sheer number of webinars that any one individual can attend during the day. And I'd like to say that that is not learning. I'd like to say that when it is about consuming information, I don't think there is any evidence that that actually constitutes significant learning. And I would say that the question maybe to sort of decide where to spend your time if you're going to invest some of your time in some of these online learning systems is actually which one of them recognizes that you can produce knowledge, that you can actually put together a project, that you can do something with the information that is available, and that you can find your own information and create knowledge. That process of knowledge creation is much more likely to be linked to significant learning, and that may be a way to significantly reduce the number of events and activities that you attend. Mary Goretti Otieno, please, we'd love to hear from you, and let me remind you, so please do keep your comment or question short and to the point, because we're next going to talk about the metaverse, probably potentially one of the most significant changes in digital space that is going to affect learning, education, and many other things, and that will be the second part of the dialogue. But first, Mary Goretti, please do introduce yourself. Tell us who you are, what you do, where you're connecting from, and then your comment and question.
Thank you, Dr. Reda. I'm Mary Goretti from the University of Nairobi. I'm a lecturer and a researcher at the center. I would say that COVID-19 has exposed the world of inequalities between the haves and the have-nots, because in most areas in the third world, like where I come from, Kenya, many areas are not connected with electricity. And online learning requires electricity, stable, and also gadgets like computers. And even if you have computers, you must have the knowledge on how to use them. And this became a challenge even to the higher learning institutions like where I am, where most of us were used to physical interaction with learners, and you were to be taken through steps on how to do Zoom, how to conduct exams online, mark online, things which up to date, most of us, some of us are not willing to take. But I thank the university that they have tried, but many others were left behind. 1 year lost, 2 years lost because of the technology. So it is now a call for the governments in underdeveloped countries to put to have the world connected to electricity, and also make things like computer cheap and affordable right from class 1 primary to higher levels of learning. Thank you so much. But I would say it has made me do a lot of courses in the process, and thanks to COVID. Thank you.
Thank you, Mary Goretti. We understand what you mean. Joyce Moretti, would love to hear from you this evening. I believe it may be afternoon for you, but whatever the case, please do introduce yourself. What is your comment or question?
Hello, Reda, and everyone who is contributing this time. I'm reaching you from the US. My contribution on this is that the digital learning is not going back. We are moving forward, and for me, I think I love digital learning because that's when I find myself in my natural element. And I like digital learning because you can make choices of what you want to learn, and concentrate on that. The other thing I want to say, digital learning, you can learn from anywhere. And as a digital leader, you can contribute, you can make an impact to everybody and anyone you want to reach out at every corner of the earth. I just remember that just before the lockdown, we had started a prayer line about 10 years ago, and many people didn't want it because they didn't understand what it was. But then churches were closed and people couldn't go out, and online prayers became the main theme for many religious leaders. And these people started coming to these particular leaders who had started online prayers to ask for skills. I also want to add that as a leader, you have to stay ahead of the game in digital skills and knowledge, because other people that you're leading are going to be ahead of you. So I love this opportunity even for to learn more about what digital learning is all about. Thank you so much, Reda, for that time. My only question is, what are we going to do about millions all over the world that have are not conversant with digital learning or digital equipment?
Indeed, and that's the question of the digital divide. Thank you, Joyce, and so many other great contributions, comments, and reflections. We're now closing part 1 of this dialogue and ready for part 2, where we're going to talk about the metaverse. This is an excerpt, it's brief, from a book called Damon, dated 2009 by Daniel Suarez. Suarez is a cybersecurity specialist, and his first novel became his bestseller, telling this really complex story of how a video game designer manages to gain control of IT systems all over the world. And he describes the near future. And here is the excerpt. Price pulled an intricate and expensive-looking pair of sports sunglasses from the box. It was sealed in yet another plastic bag. They were stylish, with yellow-tinted lenses and hip frames, but the posts were unusually thick. Price also pulled a thick, belt-like device from the box. He glanced at Sebek and started adjusting a strap. Just take me a second. You're what, size 38? HUD heads-up display. It's an interface to the Damon network. He held up the belt and clicked a battery into place. Ready, here, put this on. He handed it to Sebek. Price was fiddling with the glasses. The belt's a combination satellite phone, GPS, and wearable computer. Methane oxide fuel cell battery will last for about 3 days. Works in conjunction with the glasses. It's got a retinal scanner and a heart pulse sensor. If you're a member of the network and still alive, it knows who you are and what your rights are. It senses the moment you take them off. Put them on, you just logged on. Take him off, you just logged off. Suddenly, Sebek's lenses blinked. Then information appeared at the top and bottom of the screen. He focused on Price and was surprised to see a name call-out box hovering over Price. Just like in the game The Gate, Price's screen name was apparently Chunky Monkey. But what riveted Sebek's gaze was a translucent apparition of Matthew Sobol, sitting behind the big mahogany desk, hands folded, as if waiting patiently. This is a temporal offset projection, Sergeant. It's an interactive 3D avatar projected over the GPS grid. It's only visible and audible in your HUD, your heads-up display glasses. Sebek studied the specter. He flipped up his glass lenses. Sobol disappeared. He flipped them back down again, and Sobol's specter returned. It's a private dimension. Now, when we talk about virtual reality, Karen Watkins wrote to me a few days ago about a medical education conference asking about something called Virbela. I had never heard of it. It's a technology being used by this conference. So I checked it out. And here is what I could find out. This is a 1-minute demo intro to Virbela that you can find on YouTube.
Connecting remotely should be liberating, not exhausting. What if being remote was just as productive and fun as being together? Welcome to Virbela, where remote feels more together than ever. Virbela builds immersive virtual worlds, engineered for your exact needs, with support for thousands of people. Create your own office culture, dive into new ideas in classrooms, and throw one-of-a-kind virtual events and trade shows. Founded by organizational psychologists to redefine the future of work and education, Virbela gives you a virtual campus to create the deeply social and collaborative place people are missing.
So I'll stop it here. We're not advertising for this company or any other. But on their website, it says the next, this Virbela claims to be the next generation in education to inspire learners of all ages in your own immersive virtual classroom or campus. And to me, it sounds like a lot of technobabble. It says to enter an immersive, socially connected educational world. Now, virtual reality for education has been around for a long time. And would love to hear, Iris, what's your take on VR for education?
So I have attended a couple of medical conferences that are virtual. I think they even let you choose like how you should look as you walk through the lobby of the medical avatar, conference. Yeah. But it's kind of freaky for me, so I didn't really enjoy the experience. But in terms of virtual reality, there's a lot of interest. But since I come from the Philippines, I also have to bring up the equity issue because until we get, really good infrastructure, for example, our Wi-Fi speeds are like one of the slowest in the world. So it's really going to be hard doing virtual reality. But definitely there's a lot of interest in my university about that.
My sense is that one of the problems is most of this stuff is synchronous. And we all know that all of the sort of cumulative evidence said that asynchronous, so being able to do work offline at your own pace, anytime, anywhere, works far better in terms of learning effectiveness, learning outcomes, pretty much anything you look at than anything that requires synchronicity. Karen, what's your take on VR? Are you going to attend this medical education conference using this Virbela?
I will attend the conference, but I won't be using Virbela. I have actually gone to a session that was conducted this way. I'm with Iris. I found it incredibly awkward and strange. The whole avatar thing it doesn't appeal to me. I do think that these kinds of programs are going to get easier and easier to use, and I can see where simulating things like a medical operation, without that it has a powerful use in some of those instances. I know they're using it in veterinary medicine. It's a marvelous way to work on really large animals that it's really difficult to even see parts in large animals and sometimes super small ones as well. So I see the promise of virtual reality under certain conditions, but I find at the moment, at least, entering it as a social space is still kind of uncomfortable.
Yeah. So there's at least three things, right? There's access. This basically you need fiber optic connection to push through the graphics. Second, it's synchronous, and third, it's got this uncanny valley, is what 3D folks call it, feel that actually doesn't feel real. It's like virtual unreality. But something changed that I think could be significant this week is that the world's largest social media company, or whatever Facebook is, they made a big announcement during something they call Facebook Connect during a live stream, and it is Marnie Levine who made the announcement. Now, she is not an educator. She was promoted. She's the vice president of global partnerships, business and corporate development, and she was promoted into this newly created role of chief business officer. And this is how she presented the metaverse at the Facebook Connect event.
Hi, everyone. I'm Marnie Levine. In the metaverse, learning won't feel anything like the way we've learned before. With a headset or glasses, you'll be able to pull up schematics you're studying, or maybe even the service manual for a vehicle you're learning to repair. Let's say you're a med student or a doctor. With apps like OSO VR, you can learn new techniques in surgery firsthand, practicing until you get it right. Or, if you're studying Earth science, you could swim through the Great Barrier Reef, get up close to Earth's mightiest insects with your instructor, David Attenborough, whose VR documentary is playing now in Oculus TV.
This is a world of intrigue, a world of wonder, a secret world hidden to the human eye. Explore the extraordinary world of Micro Monsters 3D. With me, David Attenborough.
This is just one of the ways we're going to learn in the future.
This is just one of the ways we're going to learn in the future, says Facebook's chief business officer. Here we're talking about virtual reality, obviously. There is a reference to deliberate practice, especially in the context of medical education. And then there's this whole sense of sort of direct, immediately experiencing things rather than reading them. So I'd like here to reference, I'm guessing that amongst the key contributors, there are many fans of John Dewey, so the American learning theorist who some ways sort of described or theorized experiential learning as life itself, saying things like the educational process is no end beyond itself, it is its own end. And if we teach today's students as we taught yesterday's, we rob them of tomorrow. We do not learn from experience, we learn from reflecting on experience. Give the pupils something to do, not something to learn. And the doing is of such a nature as to demand thinking. Learning naturally results. So is what we just heard, is this the realization of John Dewey's ideal of experiential learning as life itself, or is it some kind of dystopian nightmare, or somewhere in between, or something else? Would love to hear, to start again with Iris, and also to hear from other key contributors, your thoughts first, and then there's a second segment about the metaverse for education. So Iris, would you like to share your thoughts at this stage?
Oh, I'm not sure. There's not a lot of trust for Facebook where I am. We're coming into the election season, and much of the discussion has been on the politics, the disinformation and misinformation. But in terms of like saying that it's experiential learning, I hesitate to say that. Being in medical education, certainly you could like take a look at the operations in the operating room. Like, we've been doing that as well with video. I don't know how much the tactile feedback will be like, for example, when you actually cut skin or, hold an artery or something. But definitely there's much distrust on learning solely from that. So there's really going to be, face-to-face experience, and the surgeons are feeling the pinch right now because of the pandemic.
All right. Karen?
I think that those were great quotes that you gave, and it's the doing and thinking. What you just showed was people entering into a lobby, or the experience. Is it really experiencing it? Am I experiencing it? And I think in some virtual reality programs I am, but am I then thinking about it and reflecting on it? And so I think that the power of experiential learning is that you're doing and thinking, and the reflecting is such an important piece of it. And I think I'm concerned, I guess, that this is more doing than thinking.
Interesting. Yep. Yeah. All right. Well, we have more from the Facebook Connect event on the metaverse for education. So here's the second clip, and then we'll discuss other aspects, because you're going to hear it's pretty explicit here.
But in order to get there, we're going to need to help build the skill sets of the people who build these experiences. So we're setting aside $150 million to train the next generation of creators to build immersive learning content and increase access to devices. And to help more creators make a living building AR effects using Spark AR, we're going to establish a professional curriculum and certification process, make it easier to monetize, and put our Spark AR curriculum on Coursera and edX.
Now, there's the big trust issue, which is kind of the elephant in the room with respect to Facebook. That Iris, it's the first thing you highlighted. Here, there's a commitment from this company, this massive social media behemoth, one of the largest companies in the world, to invest in building the skills of people who are going to create learning content. So what do you think of this kind of investment? Is $150 million too much or too little? And then there's also the second aspect that feels important to me is that Facebook says they just outright say we're going to develop our own professional curriculum and certification. So we're implicitly not necessarily going to be asking universities or conventional players in education. And Facebook seems to be doing this on their own. This is a broader, deeper trend where technology companies have been for a while producing and managing their own credentialing and learning pathways. So what do we as educators, as people involved with learning who also think about the political economy of the education industry, what is our take on this? I'd like to start with Keith Hampson this time. And I realize that's a lot of questions.
Yeah, you're good at big, difficult questions, Reda. You really are. Yeah, I mean, Facebook. There's not enough detail, frankly, to really speculate as to where this might fit in. But yeah, trust is a big issue, and it's probably because of that and other things that they want to partner with edX and Coursera, who originally, although not now, had very deep connections with the university sector, which is where they got a lot of their credibility. I think it's probably worth mentioning that Coursera and edX started out with the vision of providing university credit education. And they got, within a couple of years, realized that the universities will not play with them. And they moved into the retail market. And now they find themselves partnering with Facebook, which is the retail model of the 21st century. It's not a connection to institutions, it's connection to individuals, right? The retail model. As I mentioned earlier, Facebook is going to be able to invest a lot in this. The fact that they're trying to create their own accreditation or certification, it's probably just a way to maintain loyalty to their particular software and to their platform. And maybe it'll work, maybe it won't. I think it'll take quite a while for people to figure out how to make it worth their while to build courses with these kind of tools. It's going to be slow, it's going to be expensive, it's not going to work for everything, and we're going to have to go through that process of figuring that out.
So Keith, what details would you need? What else would you want to know about Facebook's plan in order to better understand and be able to analyze what this means for education, for the future of education, for universities, startups, other players in this space?
Yeah, well, for startups that are in the ed tech space, building actual applications, there are people right now that are just hearing about the metaverse, and they've just spent the last 3 years building something similar, and they are crying. They're sobbing because Facebook, Google, they're going to come into these spaces and they're just going to wipe out the competition. And as Zuckerberg, I think it says at some point during this presentation, we're going to keep the prices really low. We're going to underwrite this stuff so that people can use it. That makes it very, very difficult for the ed tech company. So in terms of startups, that's one issue of many. But the other one, Reda, that I would look at is just how easy are these applications to use? How easy, how quickly can somebody build something using these applications? Is it something that just anybody could figure out how to use in 20 minutes? Or is it you're going to have to really develop some skills, and will you have to be a great educator to use it? How technologically literate do you need to be? That's going to determine to a large extent not just how quickly it gets implemented, but who ultimately uses this application. Is it entrepreneurs? Is it institutions? That's going to have a major effect on how it unfolds, how it rolls out across the education marketplace.
All right. Brian Hopkins, what's your take on the metaverse at this stage?
Yeah, I think I find it a little bit difficult to understand, just how it will be used. I can see certain applications, some of the things which they showed in terms of the practical skills that you might be able to practice in safe, simulated environments. But I think Karen made the point about sort of entering these environments, a bit like sort of the Second Life experience. I think there will be a, sort of an issue about how that works. And I guess one of the things which I think is really important to think about is that learning is not just an individual activity, that learning is really about engaging with other people. And I think that's possibly something that the metaverse may be able to engage with in terms of actually promoting social learning, by getting people to kind of, collaborate together to actually develop new ideas and develop new thinking and to share ideas. I do have, I think has been touched on by a few people. I noticed, I think Keith said, and also in the chat, that anything that Facebook talks about, I feel somewhat suspicious about, because Facebook, Google, they do good thing, that in the end, the way in which these mega corporations operate is all based around profit maximization rather than altruism. So I do kind of worry a little bit about that aspect of things.
All right, thanks, Brian. All right, let's see. I see Karen's comment who says crowdsourcing the development of these applications works for Facebook, but how does the learner what material is solid? And it's true, historically, universities have been the legitimacy of universities has been to say, if you take History 101 with us, you can be sure that you're getting a valid version of History 101. Keith, do you think that is changing in today's world, that there are new valid credentials and that maybe Facebook is part of this, building skills, providing certification for content creators is taking that into account? Or do you think this is potentially one of the weak spots of this, what Facebook or Meta, as it's now called, is proposing?
No, I think you're absolutely right. I think Facebook is recognizing and running alongside very strong growth in digital education that's happening outside of our traditional colleges and universities. I'm sure that they were looking at the data as to how many people, in the US context anyway, are using Udemy and other types of applications. So the growth is outrageous, and I think it's potentially promising that it is outrageous. And Facebook is saying, hey, we're going to be part of that, and we're in a really good position to take advantage of it and to compete successfully. And it might, part of that conversation when they decided to make this investment may have simply been, look, in terms of social media, there's a limit because we've already reached it. Our business model is fundamentally bad for people. Let's go into other areas where it at least looks like we have social value. Education is like apple pie, mom and apple pie. So it may be partly motivated by the fact that no one here on this call seems to trust Facebook at all. And I'd put myself in that category as well.
Now, we saw back in 2011, 2012, we saw many university presidents get suddenly very excited by massive open online courses and sign partnership agreements with Coursera and sort of either bypass or only, maybe sort of briefly consult the leaders for universities that had digital learning centers or other equivalent structures, and sort of just getting excited and saying, let's sign with Daphne Kohler, or with Coursera, or with edX. Iris Aisiptan, you are the director of a digital learning center at the University of the Philippines, the medical school. If your university's president calls you up and says, Dr. Aisiptan, I want to, I've read about the metaverse, and I think we need to drop everything and move all of our courses and start planning for the future, for teaching and learning to happen in the metaverse. What is your response, and what do you advise your university president in such an extreme scenario?
Well, previously, I think the university did get an offer from a learning platform to go somewhere like Coursera. But the thinking then was it wasn't something that the university wanted to go into or was ready to go into. I think it's part of being a menu that actually scared people. They wanted to offer whatever digital courses would be on our own platform. I don't know if that works for everybody. But I guess branding was part of it. Now, if you're thinking about metaverse, I'm sure they will ask the details about Facebook or anything like that because of the trust issues. I don't really know what I'm going to say because, the part of me that likes change, likes to try new things. But then it's not only going to be me. So I'm not sure if everyone will be on board. So I think that would need a more discussion with everyone whether that's something we want to do.
Right. And Karen, if I wish we had Bill Wigenhorn or another sort of corporate learning leader to ask the CLO question, what would you say if your CEO gets very excited? But what would you say, Karen, to the senior leaders of your university if one of them, yes, got very excited about the metaverse in the way that many senior university leaders got very excited about massive open online courses, MOOCs, circa 2011, 2012, and hastily signed a partnerships agreement with them. What would you advise? And what do you think is a kind of strategic, maybe a few strategic questions to ask when looking or evaluating something like this that one of the world's largest companies is proposing?
Fortunately, I suspect they will not ask that of me. But
okay, I realize it's a bit extreme and absurd.
It's challenging, actually, and I liked Iris's response that in fact, this is something that faculty would need to discuss, and we're a multiverse, really, and so in our world, we would probably embrace something like this as an experimental approach. Certainly not as something that would replace the other things that we do, but I see us as a place where we should experiment with different pedagogies. We are a college of education, so our job is to understand learning and to promote new ways to learn. And I certainly think that we wouldn't want to ignore this approach. But of course, we'd want to do it in a way that really challenged and tested whether or not this promoted learning in a particular way. Mm-hmm. The concerns around Facebook as a company, I think, are one thing that I certainly share some of those as well. But I think that beyond that, just the notion of virtual reality, if you think divorce it from the corporate side, is really, I do think it's worth exploring. And so I think I would turn it over to the faculty and find out who wanted to experiment with it and view it as an opportunity to advance learning.
So let me reformulate the question, and then so Facebook is going to invest $150 million to help build the skills of content creators. If Facebook offers your department, your institution, a chunk of that funding, do you accept? Why or why not? And if you do, what do you do with it? What would be the first metaverse course that you can imagine doing that would sort of help realize, maybe overcome some of the barriers or challenges that have been difficult, that have proven difficult with the other modalities or media that you're currently using for teaching and learning? So I know it's a complex question, Karen, and then Iris, with respect to both of your institutions. So Karen, Human Resources Development and Management and the Faculty of Leadership, and Iris, the School of Medicine.
I think it would depend on what Facebook was offering the money to do. In the university, we own certification. That's what we do. We certify. So creating certification for another entity to implement, we wouldn't do. I mean, that's just it. That's not who we are. So that would be a conflict of interest. So, but so what I guess I was saying is that if the grant was more about learning about the technology, the approach, or rather than doing the certification, I could see us exploring it, but I doubt we would have anything to do with helping them create a certification that they would offer independently. That would not fit our mission.
Iris, if let's leave aside the question, if you receive all the guarantees and safeguards you need so that the concerns over Facebook as a company, over privacy issues can be set aside, and you and your university are reassured about those issues, do you accept the funding? And if so, what do you do with it?
Okay, that's a very difficult question, and I can see lawyers getting involved with everything every time the university signs like a memorandum of agreement or something. So there's a lot of details, and I would agree with Karen that it has to do with what is the grant going to be for, what exactly are we supposed to do. People now always discuss intellectual property rights as well. So products of the university, we have to be very careful about that as well. But what was interesting was your question on what would be like the first learning experience you might want to design with metaverse, taking into account like the limitations we might have right now in our teaching. And I honestly can't think of anything off the top of my head. So maybe I really have to think about that some more, and I'll get back to you with the answer.
Okay, would love to know what would be, because my sense is I thought it was really interesting to have you in this conversation, because a lot of the VR work that I know of, the research and the evidence has been focused on medical education, especially with surgery. So I'm wondering, can you tell us a little bit more? To what extent are you already using VR in any ways in the existing medical education that you support?
Not in our medical school.
No.
Because we only recently acquired the robotics platform for the hospital, but in other more affluent institutions, they do have some form of VR training, at least for the robotics arm when they do the surgeries. We do have some simulations, I think, in anatomy, where you can now dissect the cadaver digitally. But I think that's the extent that I know of right now.
Okay, really, really interesting. And obviously we keep coming back to the issue of access and resources, access to bandwidth and the resources that need to go with that bandwidth. All right, let's have a check if there are comments and or questions in the studio. Would love to take one or two questions or comments before we close this 8th dialogue of the Geneva Learning Foundation for Learning and Leadership. It's been a fascinating journey. Let's see if there are comments. All right, I see Emmanuel has been having trouble with connectivity, and this may be a completely new topic. This may be the first time you're hearing about the metaverse, much less thinking about its specific use and context for education, but we'd love to hear from some of the contributors in the room before we close. Otherwise, we will bring this dialogue to a close. So last chance to share your comments or thoughts. And my suggestion is that for the next dialogue, so about a month from now, we revisit this business of the metaverse once everyone has had a chance to think about it. I think that is it for tonight. Let's close with parting thoughts from our key contributors. Let's start with Brian, then Iris, and then Karen to bring this to a close. Keith Hampson had to leave. Brian, what's your parting thought about this dialogue? This is not your first one.
Yeah, very interesting. I was aware of the metaverse concept being launched earlier. I know that virtual reality has been talked about for many years. I'm just really interested to see how it evolves and what value it can actually bring into the learning world.
Yeah, thanks, Brian. All right, Iris, what's your final thought? This is your first dialogue for learning and leadership. Will you return, perhaps at a more convenient time?
Yes, I really enjoyed the discussion today, and hopefully I can return at the next dialogue or maybe the one after that. It's really been a good way to actually think about what I've gone through and share with others, and very comforting to know that others have had the same experiences.
And the final closing word goes to Karen Watkins, my co-convener and partner in crime for this dialogue. Karen?
partner in crime.
I love
indeed.
saying that.
I know. Well, I think this has been a fascinating conversation, both from the first part. It was really great to begin to think about leadership in another way. And I think the metaverse conversation brings us into leadership and technology. And I'm really glad in the comments that people have continued to have us think about the inequities of technology access, the trust issues of the platform, and some of the, so because there's an ethical dimension to any of really to leadership generally. So I'm really appreciative of our contributors this evening and of the conversation.
Wonderful. Thank you very much, Karen Watkins. Every episode is different, drawing on the life experiences of key contributors and of listeners like yourself who become contributors by sharing their own learning and leadership challenges and what you're doing about them. You can learn more about the dialogue on the Geneva Learning Foundation's platform, website, learning.foundation. You can subscribe to the dialogue as a podcast. Go to learning.foundation/podcast for that. And we also invite key contributors to promote their work during, before, and after the dialogue. This is so listeners who want to know more will know where to go after each episode. So today we worked through a lot of different discussions. We'll be back in about a month with the next dialogue, typically on the last Sunday of the month in December. We'll be meeting about mid-December, but otherwise you can just go to learning.foundation to see the next date and time. Take care.